Welcome to the new and improved Pump Take Sports Show. We have redesigned our format to bring you guys the best content possible. Under the new format, we have 3 sub-shows underneath the Pump Take Sports brand. The football show will be hosted by Jake and Aiden. The basketball show will be hosted by Kale and Marco. And the new hockey segment will be hosted by me and Alex. With that, I am very excited to announce our newest official member joining me on the hockey segment every week, Alex Hobson. Welcome to Pump Take, Alex.
Thank you very much, Lucas. I mean, we kind of grew up doing exactly this. Just every time there was a big trade or a big free agent signing, we'd shoot the shit. And now it's really no different, except we've got a couple microphones and a camera in front of us. So, yeah, I couldn't be more excited to be here. Little introduction about myself, I guess. Currently taking broadcasting at Niagara College, and I grew up a Leafs fan, so I know suffering like nobody else. And yeah, that's pretty much all there is to know about me. I'm excited to be here and excited to get started with Pump Take.
Yeah, we're very excited that you were able to take a little bit of time out of your schedule from Shanaclan and asking rock stars questions. Check out those podcasts as well to make time for Pump Take Sports. But hopefully you enjoy your time here and it's not too much of a commitment. It doesn't clog up your schedule too much. But anyway, so moving on, today in our first official hockey segment video, we're going to be discussing the recent blockbuster trade that saw Patrik Laine and Jack Roslovic get shipped to Columbus in exchange for Laine Dubois to Winnipeg. This is one of the most exciting trades I think we've seen mid-season in the hockey world for a very long time, because what we saw 2 young, disgruntled superstars getting traded for each other in essentially a trade that completely reshapes both teams. And hopefully for both of them, it works out in their favor. So I guess I'll start off by saying what my first initial impression of this trade was when I heard about it was, and I heard rumors about it about the potential for it happening before it actually happened as well. I was a little bit surprised at what Winnipeg wanted to give up for Laine Dubois, because in my opinion, I don't know what you're going to say about it. But Patrik Laine is the best player in the trade.
Oh, and absolutely.
And not only did they just trade Patrik Laine for Laine Dubois, but they also added in a second player in Jack Roslovic, who is also a first-round pick, young player, talented player. So it just seems like Winnipeg gave up a lot more than they would have needed to in order to get a guy like Laine Dubois, especially when you're sending a guy like Patrik Laine, who is one of the best pure goal scorers in the league the other way. So my first initial impression was that Winnipeg lost the trade. What do you think?
I tend to agree with you there. I mean, I kind of get why Winnipeg made the move for Dubois, because it gives them one of the best 1-2 center punches in the North Division. I mean, having Scheifele and Dubois down the middle, that's right up there with, Matthews and Tavares and Monahan and Elias Lindholm. Having said that, I'm surprised that the trade didn't just stop at Dubois for Laine. I think that trade would have made. I understand that Roslovic was disgruntled as well, and I guess he didn't really have a future in Winnipeg. But I'm just surprised that they didn't try and get anything else back along with Dubois as part of that trade, because as we've seen so far, Roslovic could end up being the most underappreciated or underrated part of that trade, because he's been killing it in Columbus.
Yeah, you could argue that he's been the best player performance-wise since the trade happened. And part of what I think Winnipeg was thinking is, look, if I'm being totally honest, I do think that Winnipeg actually improved as a team after this trade. Do I think they lost the trade? Yes. But do I think that Winnipeg is more properly built for a deeper playoff run? And are they a better contender now than they were before? I do think that, because when you look at teams like you just mentioned and contenders and all those teams that end up winning the Stanley Cup, what do they have? They have center depth. And what Winnipeg had before this trade was just an embarrassment of riches on the wing. And that's good. And that's helpful for like scoring goals. And they had all these dynamic young players. But what they recognize is that they can use those guys as trade chips to really like fill out down the middle, which is going to actually get you further in the playoffs when the time comes around for that.
Yeah, and I think they figured that, like you said, they can use their abundance of wingers to improve in other areas. I think they probably figured, they've got Nikolai Ehlers, they've got Kyle Connor, who you could argue has been better than Laine in the past year.
Yeah.
And they've got guys like Christian Vesalainen and Cole Perfetti coming up. Like they don't need winger depth at this point, but they did need center depth. And Dubois fills a massive hole for them in that case. It's honestly just the return for him, I think, that screws me up.
Yeah. I don't think it's a hot take at all to say that Kyle Connor has been better than Patrick Laine.
No.
Because Kyle Connor is just a much more consistent player on a nightly basis than Patrick Laine was. Patrick Laine would go on like stretches where he'd score like 15 goals in a month, but then the next month he'd score 2. Whereas Kyle Connor was kind of a consistent guy that you could throw out there in one of your top 2 lines, and you knew what you were going to get from him. He was going to put up probably a 35 goal season for you. So when you look at Winnipeg's line combinations, they don't really seem to be hurting that much, because they still have Nikolai Ehlers, who's having a fantastic season. I have him on my fantasy team. He's been like my best performer so far. He's got 9 goals, I think, already to start the year. And then they've still got Kyle Connor, who's like a solid 30 goal scorer. And then you got Blake Wheeler as well. And I think they're playing Andrew Kopp on their top line on Shifley's wing.
Had a really good start to the season.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you look at it, I do like the trade for Winnipeg, to be honest with you, but I don't see why they had to throw Roslovic into that deal to make it happen. And I think that they could have probably got something back. But again, the trade value and market for centers and guys like Dubois, who is a young player as well, and he has shown signs of being a solid top line center. The market value for a guy like that is a lot higher than a winger would be. So I think maybe I think Columbus did a good job kind of trying to fleece Winnipeg and get as much from them as they could. I just think that Laine's value wasn't valued high enough in this deal.
Yeah, and I do truthfully think that Roslovic going to Columbus was a match made in heaven, because he grew up a Jackets fan. He grew up in Ohio. So I think, if you've got a guy like Roslovic who's disgruntled, Columbus would be the first team to take him on. And like you said, he's been incredible. Not incredible. He's been great to start his time in Columbus. I think the only issue there is, like you said, Columbus probably should have given up something else if the trade would have been a little more evenly balanced. But at the same time, it's going to be one of those trades where you don't know who the real winner is until, say, 5 years down the line.
Yeah, exactly. But so far this season, Roslovic has played 9 games and he has 4 goals and 5 assists. He's been absolutely outstanding for Columbus since he's been there. Patrick Laine also has been very impressive as well. And this is kind of a bit of a transition to the next thing I'm going to talk about here. But what Laine's performance has been so far in Columbus has been quite impressive, but it's also had its ups and downs. So in 6 games with Columbus, Patrick Laine has 4 goals and an assist. So he's got 5 points. 4 goals, very impressive. He's scoring at at an elite pace right now. He's up there with the top guys like David Pastrnak and Alex Ovechkin right now, who are just potting goals left and right. So he's one of the top goal scorers in the league since his term in Columbus has started. But what I find interesting is was it his 3rd game in Columbus, when John Tortorella decided to bench him for the last half of the game. And when I first saw that, I was actually a little bit irritated. I was pretty mad about it, because I thought, here's John Tortorella. He just ships Pierre-Luc Dubois out the door because he can't get along with him. And basically Tortorella was the reason that they had to make that move, because it was Torts and Dubois that were kind of at each other's throats. So then Jarmo Kekalainen, the GM, decides, okay, I'm gonna listen to my coach. I'm gonna trade this guy, and I'm gonna get him the best player possible available. He gets him Patrick Laine, and then in his 3rd game, Torts decides to bench him, and that to me originally had me thinking, oh my God, here we go again. Patrick Laine, give it a season, and Patrick Laine is going to be asking for a trade again out of Columbus, or Tortorella would get fired, because I think that there's only so many superstars you can get on the bad side of before you kind of before it looks bad on the coach.
Mm-hmm.
But so that was going to be my original take. But then Patrick Laine's performance last night has kind of changed my opinion a little bit of it, because I think that Patrick Laine's attitude towards that benching was actually a lot better than I thought. What I originally thought was that Patrick Laine was going to be like pissed off, like he was before, and he was going to start like there was going to be a rift that was forming between him and Torts. But what happened is Patrick Laine came out the next game, scored a goal, and fought. He got in a fight.
Yep.
So I think Patrick Laine kind of like took it as a bit of a shot to the ego, and he responded well to it. He responded well to the benching, and I think Torts kind of maybe it worked out for him. You know?
Yeah.
What do you think?
And I'm not sure if you knew about this, but it was actually reported, I think, by Aaron Porthline, he covers the Jackets for The Athletic, that the reason that Torts benched him was because in I think his third game or something like that, or maybe before the game, he mouthed off at an assistant coach.
Yeah.
And he just chirped him, so it was to send a message over, treating your coaches with respect, right? It wasn't about his play. And I think that's why Laine responded positively to it.
Mm-hmm.
And he realized, okay, yeah, I am the new guy here, so I probably shouldn't be speaking like that to a guy I just met and a guy who technically, calls the shots here. And I think that's why he responded the way he did. Now, having said that, I still can't imagine that Torts and Laine is going to be a match made in heaven in the future. I mean, like if you follow hockey to an extent, and you've kind of followed Tortorella's career, he has potential to be a great coach at certain times, and
he has been a great coach at points.
He has been, yeah, and he works well in certain situations. But if you've noticed, every single team he's coached, he's overstayed his welcome for, and there eventually comes a time where with every team, he gets all he can out of the team, and eventually he I don't want to say he loses the dressing room, but he can't really take him any further. It happened with the Rangers. It happened with the Canucks. And I think it's going to happen now with the Blue Jackets. And I don't know if it's going to be directly because of Laine, but the way I see it, I feel like eventually Jarmo Kekalainen is going to be faced with a decision between Torts or Laine, because I think eventually, like, Laine is one of those guys where, he's a great goal scorer, and you know what you're getting with him, but his one fallback has always been like the lack of consistency, occasionally a lack of hustle. And that's not the type of thing that Torts deals well with. So I think eventually those two sides are going to collide a little more than we might think. And it's not happening now, obviously, because they've only been together for 5 games, like you said, or 6 games. But I think eventually, if it were to come to the point where Jarmo would have to choose between Laine and Torts, he would absolutely have to choose Laine in that situation, because you don't ship out a number 1 center and acquire a top-end talent like Patrick Laine just to side with your coach who's getting to the point where he's overstayed his welcome.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And there's a certain type of player that Torts like gets along with, and there's a certain type of player that he doesn't. And I think Patrick Laine has showed throughout his career that he has a lot of the traits that Torts doesn't really value that high in a player. Now, it's possible to overcome that, obviously. But I think the biggest thing is attitude when it comes to John Tortorella. And as an outsider fan looking in, it's hard to kind of pick up on some of those things. But there's indication that Patrick Laine does have a bit of an ego, and he may have a bit of an attitude thing, right? So there are some coaches that can kind of like help a guy through that, but there are other coaches that will just like shut them down. And I feel like the Torts and Laine tandem might not be the most effective. And I agree with you. And once, like, look, when it came to the Dubois thing, Jarmo Kekalainen said, okay, this time I'm picking my coach. But there comes a certain point when you can no longer pick your coach. Exactly. And you have to start siding with the players, because you're like, look, this is the lineup that I've assembled. I need to have a coach that can actually get the most out of them. And if Tortorella can't do that, then he's going to have to get fired and find a new job somewhere else.
Yeah, and truth be told, I don't blame Jarmo for picking Torts in that situation when it came down to Torts and Dubois, because Dubois really had a piss baby attitude towards the end of his tenure in Columbus. Like, you saw that the last shift he ever played for the Jackets, where he just kind of stood there and he let the guys around him chase the puck, and he was dogging it back up the ice. Like, he didn't want to be there anymore. So at that point, obviously you're going to pick the coach.
Did you watch the film of that shift?
It did. It was the most
he literally
thing
just
I've ever seen.
Yeah, he literally just just kind of glided around in circles and watched the puck go past him. and then just like went for the bench. It was like 30 seconds long.
And I think I put up a better effort in house league hockey, honestly.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think I skated harder as a goalie.
Probably, honestly. Like it was, you know, there are times when you watch players and you can make your knee-jerk reactions from your couch and say, oh, he doesn't look like he's trying out there, but maybe it doesn't look the same as it would if you were actually there in person watching him play. Yeah. But in that situation, it was so painfully obvious he wasn't trying. Like,
yeah, it was awful. And that was when he had already essentially been halfway out the door in Columbus at that point anyway. And I think he got a really good situation in Winnipeg, to be honest, to help him thrive and grow as a center in this league. I think to start off, they've been playing him on the second line with Connor and Wheeler on his wing. So I mean, come on, like you're looking at like Blake Wheeler, who is one of the most elite passers and playmakers in the league. So, and then Dubois is also an elite passer. And then you put him with a sniper like Kyle Connor, and I feel like that line could be deadly.
Oh, it could for sure. And when you consider that's their second line, I mean, that's pretty dangerous. I think
Winnipeg
on the upswing.
Yeah, Winnipeg could do some damage this year because their top line, as you mentioned, was Kopp on the left wing, and then Mark Scheifele, Kitchener boy, at center, and then Nick Ehlers, who's having a career year on his right wing. So, and then in the interesting thing too is in Columbus, they've actually been playing Laine and Roslovic together on the top line. I believe they're giving them top line minutes along with Cam Atkinson. So that's a pretty dynamic line too. And if you consider like they've got like the depth for their second line as well, they've got guys like Bjorkstrand and Texier and all those other dynamic young players. Like I feel like Columbus and Winnipeg kind of have similar feeling teams in many ways, where they're both kind of young and dynamic, and it's going to be interesting to see how this swap plays out for both of them.
Yeah. And I think the Jackets right now couldn't be happier that Roslovic's playing the way he is, because when you look at their center depth, it's pretty nauseating. I'm not going to lie. Mm-hmm. Right now, as of now, their center depth is Jack Roslovic, Kevin Stenlund, Boone Jenner, and Riley Nash.
Yeah, tough center depth for them.
Yeah, I mean, if Roslovic came in and didn't produce the way he is, if he produced at like half the rate that he is right now, I think that's still pretty disgusting.
Like, yeah, agreed. So who do you think came out on top of this trade?
I think right now, it's really tough to say, like I said, but I think right now probably Columbus, just because they've got the dual factor in Patrick Laine and Roslovic both performing, and I think there's potential for Winnipeg to kind of even it up and maybe have kind of like a Subban and Weber situation where one team looks like the clear-cut winner right off the bat, but it ends up kind of being the other team. I think Dubois could do wonders for Winnipeg, but as it stands right now, 9 games after, I think Columbus won the trade.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I'm going to sound like I'm kind of contradicting myself when I say this, but when you look at the trade on paper, and I said this before, I think it's pretty obvious that Columbus won the trade by getting Roslovic and Laine for Dubois. But so I would say on paper they won the trade. But if you were to ask me which team improved more, I would say Winnipeg improved more. And in that sense, I guess you could say they won the trade, because I think Winnipeg is a better team now than they were before the trade, and I think Columbus is worse. And that simply is just because of the fact that the center depth on both the teams, like you just mentioned, like Columbus's center depth is nothing, not even in the same league as Winnipeg. And that is really one of the most important positions when it comes to being successful in this league. So I think, do I think that Columbus got more value and more talent? Yes. But do I think that Winnipeg won the trade because their team improved the most? I also believe that as well. So that's an interesting part of the little dynamic of this trade that you don't see too often. But I think both teams did a good job of kind of identifying what they needed to do, and shipping guys out of town that weren't happy.
I think the other thing too about the trade that could end up paying off for Columbus in the future is the fact that if you've watched any of their games over the past couple of years, you know that they are more of a team that relies on grinding and hard work and just like those two things more or less over goal scoring. Like they don't have too much top end skill, but they have the work ethic. And we saw that can work sometimes. I mean, they eliminated the Leafs in the play-in round because they were just so relentless on the forecheck, and they would just like the Leafs, the Leafs had more skill than them by a mile, but Columbus won the series because they're full of grinders. They're full of guys that won't quit, and they score the dirty goals and they play a tough lock or shutdown defensive game.
That's the Torch style.
Exactly. But having said that, having a team like that without that top end skill and simply relying on hard work and grinding, that can only take you so far.
Yeah.
So I think the addition of Laine gives them that edge with the extra skill coming in, and he gives them that presence of the elite sniper, the guy that can finish. And I think that'll end up doing wonders for them in the future.
Yeah, I agree. So I think that wraps up our discussion about this trade. Was there any other notes that you wanted to make before we wrap up the video?
There's one quick discussion that I want to have with you, and it's only because you're a Kings fan and I'm a Leafs fan. So I want to get your opinion on this.
All right.
So for those that don't know, Elliot Friedman was on Tim and Sid the other day, and he made a point to mention that he believes that there's a specific winger that the Leafs are interested in. And he wrote that name down on a piece of paper. So naturally, Leafs Twitter is like fucking having a stroke trying to figure out who that winger is, myself included. And that's not the search for a top 6 winger isn't something I would have guessed the Leafs would be in the market for at the start of the year. But at the same time, I think they expected that Jimmy Vesey maybe could step into that role. He's been pretty quiet this year. They tried Mikheyev in that role. He just recently scored his first goal the other day. So as of now, it hasn't really worked out. So they kind of have that hole in the top or in the second line left wing spot. And I believe that if the Leafs are going to make a trade for a winger come the deadline, I think it's going to be Alex Iafallo from the Kings.
Okay, so to start, I want to ask you, why do you think it's going to be Alex Iafallo?
Well, I have a couple points. So first of all, we all know that the Leafs are in a bit of a cap crunch situation, and Iafallo comes at a relatively cheap price. He only makes $2.4 million, and he's also an unrestricted free agent at the end of the year. So it's not like they have to worry about paying him for the next couple years. On top of that, he's off to a career start to a season. He's got 9 points in 13 games so far, if I'm not mistaken. And on top of that, this is the point that I think hammers it home and what makes me believe they're in the market for Iafallo more than anyone else. Kyle Dubas loves trading with the LA Kings come the trade deadline.
They make trades all the time, eh? Kings and Leafs, like
2 years ago. Yep. 2 years ago, they traded the first and Carl Grundstrom for Jake Muzzin. That's a trade that I think's worked out well for both teams so far.
Grundstrom's been a nice little depth player for the Kings this year, for sure.
And then the Kings took, if I recall correctly, Tobias Bjornfot with their first pick. So yeah, he looks like he could be a solid.
Bjornfot's already in the league. He's been playing. He's been good.
Really,
so.
I didn't know that actually.
Yeah.
And then last year, the Leafs acquired Kyle Clifford and Jack Campbell for, I think it was Trevor Moore in 2 seconds or a second and a third or something like that.
Yeah.
And that trade's worked out well for both teams too. I mean, I know you guys got your draft picks out of that. You're kind of in a position where the Kings need draft picks and young talent more so than those guys. And the Leafs needed a backup goalie so bad, and Campbell's been everything plus more in that sense.
Yeah, so, and Campbell was expendable for the Kings too, because we have Calvin Peterson, who's kind of going to be this, like, we're kind of grooming him to be the successor for Johnny Quick.
Exactly.
So Campbell was a guy that we could trade for a little bit of value.
Yeah.
But anyway, finish up your.
So just the way I see it, the Leafs have a gaping hole in that second left wing spot next to Tavares and Nylander right now. They need a top 6 winger at this point, and with Iafallo's cheap contract, plus the fact that he's a UFA, plus the fact that Dubas just seems to love trading with Rob Blake, I think Iafallo could be a trade chip in the future.
Okay. Before I give my take, I want to ask you, what do you think they would have to trade to get Iafallo?
So the tough part about this is that the Iafallo is a good player, and he's still relatively young. So I don't think it would come at a cheap price, but at the same time, he's a UFA, so I don't think the price would be sky high either.
Yeah.
I think part of the package going back would probably be someone like maybe Alex Kerfoot. Kerfoot hasn't been great this year, but he's been a 40-point player in the past for Colorado, and I think on a team like LA where he could get maybe more minutes than he would in Toronto. And the fact that the Kings have $10 million in cap space to work with, he only makes $3.5 million, but they can afford him for the next couple of years, or I think his contract ends after next year. So this year and next year. And I think the Leafs have an abundance of kind of B-level prospects and draft picks that they could work with to send the Kings way as well. So I think something like Kerfoot and then maybe a second or
that's what I was going to say too.
Prospect or something I think would be enough to make the deal work.
Yeah. So let me preface by saying that I absolutely love Alex Iafallo. He is probably the most underrated player on the Kings, maybe even in our entire division. He's a fan favorite. He's a great 200-foot player, fantastic defensive player, and he plays on Kopitar's wing on the top line. And that's not just a coincidence. He's been there for the past like 2 seasons. And the reason for that is because he's the kind of guy that every single player on the team wants to play with, because he's just very he does everything right. He's a really good passer. He's a good finisher for when Kopitar sends him a pass. As you said, he's got 9 points this season already. Even though he's never going to put up 70 points in a season, he's the kind of guy that's going to just consistently give you that 50. And I absolutely love watching this guy play. Extremely underrated. I really hope that the Kings can re-sign him for long term, because I think he could be a great piece of this team in the future. Mm-hmm. However, if they realize and start to think that might not be in the cards, and it looks like Iafallo might want to check out free agency and see what he can get on the open market, then I'd be open to that trade that you said. If it was Kerfoot in the second, I'm okay with that. I would never. The thing that I would really want for him is definitely at least a pick or a prospect.
Yeah.
Because Alex Kerfoot, he'd be a good fill-in for the Kings, but he's not part of the Kings' long-term plan with the prospect pool that they have. So if they could send over a pick or a prospect our way, then I'd be open to that. But I would still be heartbroken to see Alex Iafallo go.
Now, see, the other thing that I was going to mention is that, like I said, Iafallo's a UFA this year, and who knows if he really likes. He's only ever played for the Kings in his NHL career, and if he really likes it there, he could very well get traded and then just sign back in LA in the offseason.
Yeah, he could.
And he's in a position where he's off to a great start this season. Like we said, 9 points in 13 games, and if he keeps up that pace, I can't imagine that the Leafs are really going to re-sign him, because you have to imagine he demands something in the $4 to $5 million range.
Yeah.
And the Leafs, that's just money the Leafs simply aren't going to spend on a guy like Iafallo, especially when they've got guys like Nick Robertson and Rodion Amirov coming up. And that's the other thing. The other reason that I'd like them to trade for Iafallo as well is because he's the type of guy, like you said, who can slot anywhere in the lineup because of the game that he plays.
Yeah.
So in the event, I know for sure that with Wayne Simmons being out for 6 months, or 6 months, 6 weeks, my bad. I know I have to imagine that if the Leafs were to trade for him while Simmons is still out, they would put him in that second line spot. But then if somebody like Nick Robertson really starts to explode and maybe he works better in the top six, you could totally get away with putting Iafallo on the third line as well, and he'd thrive.
Yeah, because he's a versatile player. You can play him as a third line checking forward. You can play him as a top line winger with your best player. He's a kind of guy that just will always, I think. And what I've picked up from what I've been watching him is he's a guy that just does so many things well that he will always have a spot in this league somewhere. Yeah. Whether he maintains his number one line job going forward, or he signs somewhere else and they use him in a different role, but he will almost surely excel in whatever role people play him in. And that's partly why I kind of want to keep him around, because if he could be once guys like Byfield and Turcotte come up and we start filling out our lineup for the future, Iafallo could be a guy we keep around as a second or third line guy that can kind of bounce up and down between those roles. But anyway, so I think we'll wrap it up there, unless you have any closing comments.
Nope, that's pretty much got every thought I need to out of the way.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in to the new and improved Pump Take Sports show, and we'll see you next week on the hockey segment.
Perfect.